We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Beis Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 60b. On the previous summit, the Gemara brought a brisa which is going to bring a machlokas tanoim in terms of which carbon minchas require hagasha to be brought close to the mizbeach. And in the brisa, the Tanakam of the brisa said that there's a pasuk that comes to include the minchas chote. And the brisa now is in the middle of saying, why do you need a pasuk? It's logical. It says havei. They changed the girsa from hacha to havei. It says to bring minchas chova, to bring a mincha of obligation. That refers to the minchas chote, the mincha of the sinner. V'nemer havei minchas nedava, and it says to bring the minchas nedava. And ma minchas nedava tuna hagasha. Now, just like minchas nedava, a donated mincha requires being brought close to the mizbeach. So af minchas chova tuna hagasha. The same should be true by minchas chova. It should be logical, and therefore, why do we even need a pasuk? But the brisa continues, Mala minchas nedava, shekena tuuna shemen ulavona, but minchas nedava, you can't learn from there necessarily, because minchas nedava requires both shemen and lavona. That's not true by a minchas chota. You're not even supposed to put on shemen and lavona. And so to that the brisa says, well, minchas sota tochiach. We could prove the other way from minchas sota, which does not require shemen and lavona. Mala minchas sota, shekena tuuna tnufa, but minchas sota also is unique, because it requires waving, and minchas nedava tochiach, but minchas nedava can prove that wrong, can prove the other way because it does not require waving, so that's not the unique characteristic which is saying that hagasha is required. And so the point is, v'chazar hadin, you go back and forth. You can't learn directly from minchas nedava. It has something unique. You can't learn directly from minchas sota. It has something unique. Lo roizeh koroizeh, v'lo roizeh koroizeh. This one is not like this one, and this one is not like this one. Hatzad hashavish abahen, but what is the common denominator of both of them, of minchas nedava and minchas sota? Sheshavu l'kmitza, they're both equal in the fact that there's kmitza, a fistful is taken and burned on the mizbeach, v'shavu l'hagasha, and again, they both are brought close to the mizbeach, there's a halach of hagasha. Af ani avi minchas chote, so too, I'm going to include minchas chote, sheshavu lohen l'kmitza, it has the same halach of kmitza, so teshavu lohen l'hagasha, it should have the same halacha of hagasha, and so therefore again, what do we even need a pasuk for? But the brisa continues, ma'ala atzad hashavah shabahen, but there's a different common denominator between minchas nedava and minchas sota. Shekein hochsharu lavo ba'asher kavani, because those, it's the same carbon that's brought if the person's wealthy, if he's poor. But tomar by minchas chote, whereas by minchas chote, there we say it's not the case. There we can say shelo hochsharu lavo ba'asher kavani. It's not the same as a wealthy person brings as a poor person brings. That's an example of a variable carbon. The wealthier person will bring an animal or a bird carbon, and it's only for the poor person who brings the minchas chote, and so therefore you can't compare the minchas chote to these other karbonos. Talmud lomar es hamincha, and so therefore the brisa returns, the Tanakam returns to what it said in the previous Amud. It's really coming from the pasuk of es hamincha. And the brisa continues, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Vehevesa, it says in the pasuk Vehevesa, again, that's in the pasuk which mentions Hagasha, that's L'rabos Minchas HaOmer LaHagasha, that comes to include the Minchas HaOmer, there's a halach of Hagasha over there. Rashi explains, Rabbi Shimon v'Tanakama lo pligi, Rabbi Shimon and Tanakama are not really arguing here, Elamar Dorish Chadu, Mar Dorish Chadu, one's darshaning one halacha, the other is darshaning a different halacha, but they're not arguing. In any case, again, it says Vehevesa, that includes the Minchas HaOmer for Hagasha, V'chein Hu Omer, and likewise it says by the Omer, it uses that term, V'havesem es Omer reishis ketzirchem ala kohen, so it says V'havesem, and so therefore we understand to include the Omer. And then V'hikriva, it also says the word V'hikriva, again with regards by Hagasha, we can include the following, L'rabos, Minchas Sota l'Hagasha, that word V'hikriva in the pasuk, that comes to include the Minchas Sota, that also has a halacha of Hagasha, and it uses that word by Minchas Sota, V'chein Hu Omer, likewise it says, V'hikrivo so el ha-mizbeach, it says V'hikrivo so el ha-mizbeach, and so therefore, again, we're going to learn from that inclusion that this halach of Hagash applies by Minchas Sota as well. V'dinu, now, isn't it logical? Uma Minchas Chote, if with regards to the Minchas Chote, she'eino te'una tenufa, which does not require waving, te'una Hagash, it does require Hagash, it must be brought close to the Mizbeach. So then Minchas Sota, so then with regards to Minchas Sota, she'te'una tenufa, which requires waving, eino din she'te'una Hagash, isn't it logical it should require Hagasha? And therefore, Rabbi Shimon is saying, why do we need a pasuk to specifically include the Minchas Sota, but the brisa continues, Mala Minchas Chote, Shekein Ba'achita. No, you can't necessarily learn from Minchas Chote, because the Minchas Chote comes from wheat, and the Minchas Sota does not come from wheat, it comes from barley. And the brisa continues, Minchas HaOmer Tochiach, well, Minchas HaOmer can prove the other way, it comes from barley, but Mala Minchas HaOmer, but the Minchas HaOmer is unique, Shekein Tu'una Shemen Ulavona, that requires oil and frankincense, and the Minchas Sota does not require Shemen ulavona. As a matter of fact, one is not allowed to place shemen and lavona on the minchas sota. Minchas chote tochiach, but minchas chote can prove the other way. The minchas chote is similar to the minchas sota. They both don't require shemen and lavona. V'chazar hadin, and again it goes back and forth. Lo roizeh karoizeh, v'lo roizeh karoizeh. This one is not like this one, and this one is not like that one. Hatzara hashava shebehen. What's the common denominator between them? Sheshavu l'kmitza. Both of them are equal in terms of the law of kmitza. V'shavu l'hagasha, and they're equal in terms of hagasha, bringing close to the mizbeach. Afani avi minchas sota sotu. I include the minchas sota. Sheshav salehen l'kmitza. It's the same with regards to the halach of kmitza. Tishva lehen l'hagasha. So it should be the same in terms of the halach of hagasha. But the Brisa continues, there's a different common denominator by minchas chote and minchas omer that doesn't apply to minchas sota. Ma'ala atzara hashava shebehen, they have a common denominator. Shekein lehuchshu lavo kemach, they don't come as kemach, which is regular flour. They come as solas, they come as fine flour. Tomar minchas sota, but you should say by minchas sota, shochshu lavo kemach, that comes as kemach, and therefore you can't derive sota logically. And so therefore, Talmud Lomer v'yekriva, that's why the pasuk says v'yekriva, we actually learn it from the pasuk. And the Brisa continues, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, v'hevesa, the word v'hevesa is l'rabos minchas sota l'hagasha. That is coming to include the minchas sota in terms of the halach of hagasha. V'chein hu Omer, and likewise it says, v'hevi es karbono le, it says v'hevi with regards to sota, so it's really learned from v'hevesa. Avol minchas Omer, but Rabbi Yehuda says, with regards to the minchas Omer, lo tzricha kra, there we actually don't need a pasuk. We can learn that out logically. My time, what's the reason? Midino ka'asi. We can learn it out logically as follows. Uma minchas chote sheina tenufa. If with regards to the minchas chote, there's no requirement of waving to una hagasha, there is a requirement of bringing close to the mizbeach. So minchas omer, the minchas omer shetuna tenufa, which does require waving, eino din shetuna hagasha. Isn't it logical that it should require hagasha to be brought close to the mizbeach? But then one might argue, Ma'ala minchas chote shekein ba'achitin, minchas chote is unique, it comes from wheat, but minchas sota tochiach, minchas sota can prove the other way, that's from barley. But Ma'ala minchas sota shekein ba'levarer avon, with regards to minchas sota, it's unique because it comes to clarify sin. The mazkeres avon it's a mazkeres avon, again it clarifies the sin of the sota. But minchas chote tochiach, minchas chote can prove the other way, because that really also is coming for sin. The chazar hadin, it goes back and forth. Lo roizeh karoizeh, v'lo roizeh karoizeh. Again, this is not like this one, and this one is not like that one. Hatzara hashava shebehen, the common denominator between them. Shekein shavu l'kmitza. Again, they both have the halach of kmitza, of the fistful. V'shavu l'hagasha, and they have the halach also of hagasha. Afani avi minchas omer. So too I can include minchas omer. Sheshavsa lehen l'kmitza. It has the same halach as kmitza. Tishva lehen l'hagasha. So it's going to have the same halacha as hagasha. And the Gemara continues and asks, Umay paracht, what can we do to refute this logical derivation of Rabbi Yehuda? Clearly Rabbi Shimon does not hold of the logical derivation because he has a pasuk that comes to include minchas omer. And so the Gemara continues and explains, Rabbi Shimon parachachi, Rabbi Shimon will ask as follows, Mal hatzara hashava shebehen, with regards to the common denominator, there is a different common denominator between the minchas sota and the minchas chote that is not by the minchas omer, shekein mitzuyin, because they are mitzuyin, meaning to say they're more frequent than the minchas omer. The minchas omer is something that just is once a year. Minchas sote, minchas chote, the minchas sota and the minchas chote can happen more than that. For Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Yehuda says, Adrav, on the contrary, ha mitzuya tvei, actually the minchas omer is even more mitzuya. It's more frequent. Why? Because hanach zimnin de lo mashkachas lo klal. It's possible by those, with regards to minchas sota and the minchas chote, it's possible they won't happen at all. But the minchas omer, it's certainly going to happen once a year. And the Gemara now continues and quotes a brayso, so ein omer vehevesa, maybe the real reason why it says vehevesa is for a different reason altogether. It means to say that a yachid, an individual, is able to donate a different kind of karban mincha besides for the ones that are mentioned in this parsha. Rashi explains, the kaparach tana, now the Tana of the Brisa asks the following question. Maybe the word vehevesa is not to include minchas sota for hagasha. V'lo omer, it's not to include the omer. Ela lomer, rather to say something else entirely. entirely. It's to say that an individual can donate a different mincha that's not mentioned in this parsha. It's besides the Hey Menachos Amar B'Parsha. There are 5 kinds of minchas that are mentioned in the parsha: solas, umachavas, umarcheshes, umafesh, yesh bashtayim. The mafe has 2, as we said. It has chalos and rekikin, so that's a total of 5. Dechol hanochiten. The point is, all of these are wheat. Kedechsiv solas. It says solas v'solas chitin. Solas is chitin. It's wheat. V'kaasi v'hevesa. And maybe v'hevesa is coming for something else. It's l'rabos sheyachin misnadev min hasaor. And maybe it's to say that an individual can donate a carbon mincha that's made from barley. And the Brisa continues and explains, Vidinhu, and this is logical, Tzibor mevi mincha min hachit and chova. The Tzibor, the community, they bring a mincha from wheat, that's an obligation. Umevi mincha min hasor and chova, there's also a mincha from barley, that's an obligation. And so therefore we can argue as follows, Af yochid, so too by the individual, Shemevi mincha min hachit and nedava, just like he brings the mincha from wheat as a donation. So Yavi mincha min hasor and nedava, so too he brings the mincha from barley as an nedava. Talmud lomar eila, but the pasuk says eila, and what that means is ein li elo eila, means only these. It means to say only wheat. There's no such thing as a mincha of sa'orin that is donated. But the Brisa continues and questions this. So Eino Omer Eila Ela La Omer Harei Olai Mincha Shemevi Chamishtan. Maybe the real reason it says Eila is to say that if somebody says Harei Olai Mincha, he just says he's going to bring a mincha in general, he has to bring all 5 of them. Talmud Lomer Mei Eila, but the pasuk says Mei Eila, and that tells us this is not the case. Rather, Rotza Achas Mevi, Rotza Chamishtan Mevi. If he wants, he brings 1. If he wants, he brings the 5. And Rashi explains, Umavian min hasaor, and again there's an obligation from Sa'orin that the Tzibor brings, that's Chovas minchas omer, that refers to the minchas omer, which is a communal obligation, that's barley. And Rashi continues, Harei olai mincha, if somebody says Harei olai mincha stam, he simply says, it's upon me to bring a mincha, but doesn't specify, Shemevi kolei lechamishtan bal karchu, maybe he has to bring all 5 of these kinds of mincha against his will. And again the Brisa said me'ela, it says me'ela mixas eila, it means some of them, not all of them. And the Brisa continues, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Es ha-mincha, when the pasuk says Es ha-mincha, l'rabo shar menachos, it's to include other menachos, kagon minchas nachrim, minchas nashim, for example, the mincha of non-Jews, the mincha of women, lahagosha, they also have this halach of hagosha, bringing them close to the Mizbeach. Now, yochol shani marbav shtei halechem v'lechem aponim, one might think that I also include the shtei halechem, which is brought on the Shavuos, and the lechem aponim, maybe they also have hagosha. Talmud lomar me'ela, the pasuk says me'ela, and that functions as an exclusion. Now, why do you see fit to include other menachos and to exclude the shtei halechem and the lechem aponim? Marbani shar menachos. So the reason why is I include other menachos sheyesh mehen leishim, because there's some from that minchas burned on the fires of the mizbeach. Umotzi ani shtei halechem and lechem aponim, but I exclude the shtei halechem and the lechem aponim she'ein mehen leishim. None of those are burned on the fires of the mizbeach. But the Brisa continues, Valo minchas nesachim, but what about minchas nesachim? That's the mincha of libations that accompanies the animal karbonos. Kulo lo ishim, that's entirely burned on the fires. And so therefore, yachol ye tu'una hagasha, one might think that also requires hagasha, that should be brought close to the mizbeach. Talmud lomar, the pasuk says v'hikriva, it says v'hikriva, and the idea is that is to exclude minchas nesachim. But the Brisa continues and asks, but didn't we already use v'hikriva? That was used earlier to include minchas sota. And the Brisa says to that, v'hikriva, could have said v'hikriv, so it says v'hikriva, and so therefore we can actually learn 2 things from this pasuk. But the Brisa continues, but why do you see fit to include other menachos and to exclude minchas nesachim? And Rashi explains, Rabbi Shimon Omer es ha-mincha, Rabbi Shimon says that when the pasuk says es ha-mincha, amarnu l'rabos es shar menachos, we said that comes to include other menachos, kagon shel chote, for example, the minchas chote l'hagasha, for the halach of hagasha. We will note over here that in our text of the Gemara, it actually says kagon minchas nachrim, minchas nashim, and here Rashi is saying minchas chote. The Shita Mekubetzes actually takes out the words minchas nachrim and minchas nashim over here. But in any case, again, we said earlier, that's to include these other menachos for hagasha. And so Rabbi Shimon then said, Yochol shani mar v'heimenu av shtei halechem v'lechem aponim. The main point is that Rabbi Shimon is saying one might think to include also the shtei halechem and the lechem aponim. And to that, again, it says me'ela mashma miyuta. The word me'ela, that's understood as an exclusion. Kilomar ein ton hagasha ela hadome le'elu, meaning the only things that require hagasha is if it's similar to these carbon minchas, and therefore the shtei halechem and the lechem aponim, they are not similar because ein mehen le'ishim, as we said, they're not burned on the fires of the mizbeach. Pesach. And Rashi continues, the Brisa then said, V'apikte, didn't we already use the word Ve'ikriva again? L'rabos minchasota, we used that earlier to include minchasota. How are we using it now to exclude minchas nesachim? And the Gemara answered to that, V'hikriv matzi l'michtav, it could have said Ve'hikriv, Uchse Ve'ikriva, it says Ve'ikriva, so we can essentially use the pasuk for both. And Rashi continues and notes, Mimata minchas nesachim, by minchas nesachim, again it's an exclusion as we said, Demash mamiyat, because it can be understood as an exclusion, Osa da'iriba, meaning the mincha that we're dealing with, V'lo acheres, and not a different one. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Aleph Amud Aleph.